Well, good evening and welcome to Conversations in the Steps of Jesus. It is wonderful that you can join us tonight as we continue our visit and our tour of the Holy Land. Today we're at the Mount of Olives. Now, if you don't know me, I'm David Kelleher. I'm afraid Tony Jones once again won't be able to join us tonight. But we are able to welcome back Dr. Peter Walker. Peter, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Now, we've moved south. We've been in the north of the country. We've moved south. Can you just help us get our bearings where we are in Israel at the moment?
That's right. Well, it's lovely to be with you again. And the last few weeks we've been up in the north of the country in Nazareth, and 2 weeks in Galilee. Last week in Caesarea Philippi, the extreme north of the modern Holy Land, the modern nation of Israel. And now we've come about 120 miles south down. We're just outside Jerusalem. Here we have a map which is showing you the political borders at the time of Jesus. And the large yellowy green area there is Judea. And you can see coming down from Lake Galilee down to the Dead Sea, Jesus would have come down past Lake Galilee, down the Jordan Rift Valley to Jericho, which is just at the top of the Dead Sea there, and then head west, going up the hills, up into the hills, through the desert, up to Jerusalem.
And so we've kind of skipped the whole of the middle of the country. We've been up by the Sea of Galilee, and there's, I don't know, what's that, 60, 70, 80 miles that we've skipped?
Yes, it's 90 miles roughly from Jerusalem to up to Capernaum. So it's an hour and a half to 2 hours on the road today, coming down to Jericho. Yeah.
Well, let's look at the sort of zoomed up in and closer map. Why don't you help us get our bearings in Jerusalem itself?
Well, that's right. Here we have we're looking down. Mount of Olives is on the right-hand side of the screen. You can see a funny shape on the left, which is not quite a rectangle. It's the shape of the ancient temple, the temple at the time of Jesus, and that is in Jerusalem, across a valley which is down the middle of the shot, and then the Mount of Olives is to the right. You can see we've got some different villages there, and Bethany and Bethphage are referred to. They're just on the southern end of the Mount of Olives.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Peter. We're going to watch our first video now, but before we do that, Peter is going to read to us from Luke 19, so to help us get our bearings in Luke's Gospel, verses 28 to 30, and he's going to help us get our bearings in Luke's Gospel, and then we'll watch the video.
Thank you. Yes, we've skipped 10 chapters from where we were last week, from Luke 9 to Luke 19. We're down now in the south of the country. Jesus has been on a long journey. Many Galilean pilgrims are with him, coming down to celebrate Passover as part of the vast crowd of people, probably several hundred. And now we read in verse 28 of Luke's 19. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany, at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here." And it's a slightly extraordinary story of Jesus asking people to go ahead and prepare a vehicle for him. And it's a donkey. We're going to learn more about that. And we're here on the top of the Mount of Olives, just by a village called Bethphage, which means House of Figs. And our next shots are going to be in the video showing you that location now.
Bethphage seems to have been Jesus' preferred place for meeting his friends. But why that donkey? Jesus was evidently staging his arrival with great care. He had decided he was not going to be walking into Jerusalem, but riding in, and not on a horse, but on a donkey. Why? It all looks vaguely absurd. Well, that may indeed have been one part of Jesus' intention. There was another messianic claimant in the first century, a man called Simon ben Giora, and he indeed came onto the Mount of Olives seated on a horse. Very impressive, a sign of military strength and of a militant agenda against the Jews' hated oppressors, the Roman leaders. Well, that was precisely the message that Jesus was not wanting to give. The leaders in Jerusalem, whether they were the Jewish aristocracy or the Roman leaders, they need have nothing to fear from Jesus politically. Jesus was a different kind of Messiah. Yet another part of Jesus' intention was surely to remind people of the prophecy in Zechariah. Zechariah 9:9 reads, "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey." So yes, the donkey was a sign of Jesus' lowliness and his humility, but it was also a sign, a signal that he was a king, the true king of Jerusalem. Jesus was making a royal claim, a claim to a throne, and his entry into Jerusalem was a procession in a coronation ceremony, Jesus about to be enthroned as king.
Well, Peter, I wonder, before we sort of get on to discussing that video, can you just tell us where we are? Tell us about your backdrop and my backdrop. What are we looking at?
Yes, the backdrop behind me is looking up from the desert, the Jericho behind us, as it were, looking up now to the Mount of Olives, which is the highest hill along this ridge of hills that run north and south in the country. And Jerusalem is beyond that hill and over the other side of it. So you're coming up from the desert, you've set off early in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, it's March or early April. You're making your way up, you're tired after many days' journey, and you've got to make this steep final climb to get over the top of the Mount of Olives before you see Jerusalem. That's what's behind me.
And is that, I can see a church at the top of the hill. Is that the church that featured in the video just now?
That's right, in the area which we think would have been Bethany, this tiny little village or hamlet, we might say, with Bethany just about 600 yards further around the southeast. So Jesus would actually come up to the right of that church, and then they'd have to do a little bit of a detour coming back round southwards in order to find the donkey and then make his way further west down into Jerusalem.
Okay, and what's behind me?
Well, you've actually got a bit of a privileged view there. Behind you, we're looking southwest actually, to across the lower part of Jerusalem, the city of David, towards Bethlehem in the distance. And you've got some of the view that you're going to get. We're going to get it even better in the video as you actually see Jerusalem for the first time from the crest of the Mount of Olives.
And it looks quite built up. Presumably in Jesus' day, there'd be just a lot of countryside there. Is that right?
Well, that's right. It's called the Mount of Olives, and it would have been covered with olives far more than it is today. As I mentioned, Bethany is a tiny hamlet. It might have just have been 8 or 10 houses. Bethany, a tiny village, perhaps 200 residents, that kind of thing. A lovely place to escape from the hustle and bustle of Jerusalem. We've got 20,000 people living. Yes, not nearly so built up, obviously, but just one thing to remember, the Mount of Olives was also the place where the Galilean pilgrims barbecued and had their campsite because they had no place to stay in Jerusalem. So they all bivouacked out on the Mount of Olives. And so it would have been a bit of a carnival festival feel to it.
Okay. Well, let's move on to think about the text that you read out and the video that we saw. How significant a moment is this in Jesus' life and ministry as he sort of prepares to go to Jerusalem?
Well, the way all the gospel writers refer to this episode, they all see it as very climactic. It brings to an end Jesus' Galilean ministry. It's a moment when really he comes good, if you like. He comes into the city, announces his claim. And if there had been things which have been a little bit enigmatic or secret or not too sure what they mean, now here it's as though Jesus deliberately presses the public button, if you like. We're now going to reveal who I am and make this claim. And Jerusalem, of course, because it's the capital city, is the best place and indeed the only place to really say, I am the king. You know, you've got to go to London and announce the fact that you're the ruler. And so you have to go to Jerusalem and this is his demonstration of who he's claiming to be.
And so last week we were at Caesarea Philippi, where sort of Peter said, maybe for the first time, you are the Christ, and or the Messiah, and that was sort of privately with the disciples, and now it's publicly to everyone. Is that right?
I think this distinction between private and public is really good. As I said, if there's something that's been secret before, now it's going to the rooftops, to use the phrase of Jesus. And yeah, I think Jesus has said this is the moment when his hour has come. I believe that Jesus has been in Jerusalem before. This is not the very first time he's been there.
So what's so special that if he's been to Jerusalem before, what's so special about him sort of saying, I want to press my claim now?
Well, it's partly because it's Passover season, and so it's a very important political and religious climax within the year, and so it's very important he's doing this at Passover time, and it's when so many people are there. So if you want an audience, and if you want to make your claim to be the ruler of a people, this is when the people is chiefly gathered, do that which this people uniquely does, celebrate Passover in Jerusalem. It's the must be place. It's the go-to location, and it's the most important season of the year.
Okay. Yeah. Now you make a big deal in the video about the donkey, and I think Luke makes a big deal about going to get a colt and riding on the colt, and that he's making a royal claim by riding on the donkey, and yet not one that's a political threat to the Jewish aristocracy or the Romans. Can you tell us what kind of a king is this?
Yes, the text from Zechariah, which we quoted there, it's an Old Testament prophecy that, behold, your king comes to you, O daughter of Zion, a way of referring to Jerusalem. Your king comes to you humble and lowly and seated on a colt. And so Jesus is evoking this story. And it's not necessarily at that moment that everybody in the crowd has twigged biblical allusion, but Jesus knows what he's doing. And later writers can see, oh, that's what he was doing. He's therefore drawing on this theme that he is the king, the true king of Jerusalem. And by the way, who's the true king of Jerusalem in biblical thought? Actually, it's God himself. Just notice that. He's also doing in a real atmosphere of humility. And just note that contrast with others in the first century who stood on the Mount of Olives, or didn't stand, they actually seated on a horse on the Mount of Olives as a threat. We're going to come and charge into Jerusalem. Jesus doesn't pose that kind of threat. It's almost a parody. I mean, it's almost ridiculous. It's almost embarrassingly stupid. Who is this king that would come in on a donkey? It's almost sending up all the pride and the pomp and the splendor you'd expect of a king. And yet, because of that biblical prophecy, it is actually nevertheless claimed to be a king, obviously a king of a very different kind.
Yeah, so it's striking, therefore, presumably as king, he's still making some kind of claim on the people of Jerusalem and, maybe the people beyond that.
Yeah.
But it's not one that requires a national country. Is that right, or how would you put it?
I think that is right. Just before this passage, actually, in Luke's Gospel, when lots of people we read in Luke 19 are expecting the kingdom of God to come at once because Jesus is going up to Jerusalem, Jesus deliberately tells them a parable about a king who went into a far country and came back and was actually pretty brutal to the people who didn't want him to be king over them. It's happened just a verse before the one we read. And so Jesus is bringing a message which is very strong. He is the king, and you better watch out. And if you don't want me to be your king, there may be a problem. It's clearly not nationalistic. Let's build the kingdom of first century Israel. Let's do that. That's not what he's about. So I don't want to use the word spiritual, the contrast to political. The word spiritual is too weak and unclear. It's a different kind of kingly rule. It's a very serious rule. Jesus wants to be the king that we need to receive.
Okay, well, let's watch the second video now, because you mentioned a claim about you say that the true king of Jerusalem is God. And so let's watch a second video where you kind of go into some of the reasons for that in a bit more detail.
Yet there's even more to this claim than that. For in biblical thought, the true king of Jerusalem, of Zion, is the Lord God himself. Jerusalem is the city of God, the city of the great king. And Israel as a nation, well, it's a theocracy, a nation ruled by God himself. So Jesus has come to reinstate that divine rule. It is the return of the king, the return of the Lord. Two other Old Testament passages confirm this extraordinary claim that Jesus is making here in Bethphage. In Isaiah 52, we read, "The prophet had foretold a time when messengers would proclaim good news and say to Zion, 'Your God reigns,' i.e. that the king has come. And when the watchmen on Jerusalem's walls would with their own eyes see the Lord return to Zion." Is Jesus claiming to be the Lord returning to his capital city? Maybe that's precisely why, when telling those two disciples what to say to the donkey's owners, he told them to say simply, "The Lord has need of it." Jesus was claiming to be the Lord. Secondly, in Ezekiel chapter 11, Ezekiel had described a vision, a tragic vision in which the glory of the Lord, which had previously been located in the Holy of Holies within Jerusalem's temple, now rose up and departed from the temple, leaving it abandoned and desolate of God's presence. But where, according to verse 23, did that divine presence, that Shekinah glory, come to rest? Above the mountain to the east of the temple, that is, the Mount of Olives. It's a strange vision, but there's a hint here that with Jesus about to visit the temple, we may be about to witness the return of the glory of the Lord. So there's more going on here than meets the eye. The Galilean pilgrims around Jesus, they all saw him as a teacher. Some went further and saw him as a prophet about to proclaim the word of the Lord to Jerusalem. Many thought he was the Messiah, the true king, the one who's coming in the name of the Lord. But perhaps it was only later that the apostles and the gospel writers saw this deeper claim that Jesus was making, his claim to be the embodiment of the Lord and his glory. So on the day itself, when Jesus got on that donkey, only Jesus knew the full import of what was going on. But Jesus did know precisely what he was doing, and the gospel writers want you to know it too. So let's be on our way and follow the route of Jesus up to the crest of the Mount of Olives.
Great, thank you for that, Peter. Let's now turn to read the text from Luke 19, because you make reference to that in the video. So I'll read it. "If anyone asks you why you untying it," that's the donkey, "say, the Lord needs it." Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked him, "Why are you untying it?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. So, Peter, in the video, you pick up on the fact that Jesus says, "Say the Lord needs it," and you think that that's a hint of pointing something to being God himself. Can you just explain why should we see that and not just think him using the word Lord as in, master or boss?
Well, that's right. I think we've got to be honest that this word in Greek, which is kurios, does have a lower meaning and a higher meaning, if you like. The lower, more ordinary meaning is that it's the word you would say to your boss or your master. But in Jerusalem, of all places, and the idea of the Lord very clearly has this kind of higher meaning. It's a way of referring in the Greek to Yahweh, the God of Israel. And when you put that together with those texts in Isaiah and Ezekiel, as I did there, which talk about the return of the Lord to Zion and the glory of the Lord, which departed from the temple, now, as it were, possibly coming back in the person of Jesus, I think one would be pretty sort of blind, if you like, not to see that's probably a strong hint from Jesus. He's claiming to be the Lord, with a capital L, if you like, Lord God.
Okay, and can you just say how does Jesus refer to himself in Luke's gospel? Does he use that term a lot, or does he? I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen he calls himself Son of Man. Um,
Well,
is
in Luke's gospel, it's more a term that's used of him, and indeed Luke, the narrator, the writer of the gospels, uses this to say, for example, later in the story when Peter denies Jesus, it says the Lord turned and looked at Peter, and it's just Luke's quick way of referring to Jesus. He doesn't say Jesus, he says the Lord. And so it's one of Luke's quick ways of referring to who he now thinks Jesus is, and his readers should perhaps begin to agree with him on that. You've got to think that Luke is writing 30 years later, perhaps, and the earliest Christian creed or confession is Jesus is Lord, just two words in Greek actually. And so the idea of the Lord Jesus and Jesus as Lord is very clear in Luke's mind now. So when he talks about Jesus saying the word the Lord has need of it, pretty clear that I think Luke has it with that deeper sense in mind. Jesus is Lord.
And I mean, I guess some people may be thinking, we're going into quite a lot of detail about the meaning of a word. I mean, how important is it to bear in mind the context of the rest of Luke's gospel? We've seen him do miracles. We've seen him claim to be Messiah in a sort of near a town with a temple to a human king. How much is Luke expecting us to keep everything in mind as we read this?
Well, that's right. You've always, when you're a writer, you build up a story, and collectively it grows like a snowball. And so when Jesus arrives in Luke 19 on the Mount of Olives, this isn't just any old person. This is the person who has calmed the storm, who's been declared as Messiah, who's done these miracles, who's announced the year of the Lord, etc., has spoken the word of the Lord. There's a whole identikit photo, as it were, of who this Jesus is, who's now coming over the Mount of Olives. And if we suddenly forget all of that and think, oh, that's irrelevant, let's now just look at this passage on its own, well, no author could forgive us for doing that. We're completely misreading the story that he's been building, the storyline and the portrait of Jesus that he's been giving us.
It is astonishing, Peter. We've talked about this as if this is Jesus claiming to be God, but there's another way of looking at it, isn't it? Which is, this is God come down in human form, making his claim to be king of Jerusalem. And when you put it like that, it's astonishing, isn't it, that he would be the king who comes on a donkey, don't you think?
Well, yes, I mean, I'm quite amazed as you're unpacking that in front of us tonight. That's a very interesting. You can look at the story from the human angle upwards and see Jesus claiming to be the embodiment of God's presence in his own person. Yes, you can look at it from the top down, if you like, and think, could this be the moment when God, in human form, is now coming to his own city, which he planned 1,000 years before and built up through David? This is the moment of the divine arrival of the divine king. You can look at it from both angles, because that's the nature of Jesus. Eventually, we come to confess that he is both human and divine. And so, yeah, behind this whole story, you can see the passionate longing and love of God, the Old Testament God, towards his people Israel and towards Jerusalem, city which he had prepared to be like a bride adorned for her husband, and he was the husband, if you like. And so this is a great wedding ceremony. It's a coronation ceremony. It's the arrival of God in human form to the city of God. It's a very, very powerful moment.
One other detail I'd like to pick up on, we read in that passage that the people took off their clothes and laid them on the floor, cloaks. Is there any significance in that particularly?
I think it's a dramatic and extravagant form of praise and deference. we don't know precisely what it might have meant in their culture, but we lay out the red carpet for important figures to make sure that their feet don't get dirty and that we're honouring them as distinctive. This is the nearest they can do. This wasn't anything that they had planned. Minutes ago, you know, Jesus wasn't on a donkey. Now he's on a donkey. They're about to go into Jerusalem. They're feeding festival. Hey, this is the moment. What we can do? And they've got their outer garments, and they throw them down. So it is deference. It's festival. It's party. It's a coronation procession, and I think it has got this royal, regal feel to it. Certainly, they are making him out to be very, very special indeed.
So it's that a kind of instantaneous response to saying, "Oh, a donkey's turned up, and let's put Jesus on it, and let's make this a bit. Let's celebrate his arrival."
Let's hype it up a little bit, but remember that they're wanting to have their moment. They've been walking from Galilee for a week or more. They're tired. They're just about to see Jerusalem. This is their moment of expectation, and there's been a bit of fever pitch amongst them about what Jesus is going to do when he arrives. So they're kind of swelling the crowd and augmenting the feel, if you like, hyping it up a little bit. Who knows what motivations they had? Some would have been rabble rousers. Some people, you know, got their own negative agendas, but there'll be some who really think this is a key moment. God's kingdom is coming, and I'm going to do my part by laying out some clothes in front of this king on a donkey.
Great. Let's watch the next video now.
Each year, this is the route used by modern Christians for a Palm Sunday procession. We sing our hymns and wave our palms, all proclaiming that Jesus is our King. In Jesus' day, the Roman road would have made a right at this point, but we're going to turn left and go past an enclosure that we're going to come back to later.
And prepare to walk down the Mount of Olives a slightly different way. As we do so, we might call to mind some of the Psalms, which would have been on the lips of those Galilean pilgrims, whether silently or aloud. In particular, there's the famous Psalm 122. I was glad when they said unto me, we will go to the house of the Lord.
They say that a pilgrim's heart always skips a beat at its first sighting of Jerusalem. And there's a verse in Luke's Gospel which captures that moment so well. It reads, when Jesus came near to the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Well, it sounds like the crowd getting it right. They're sort of along the right lines, isn't it? They're saying they're praising Jesus as their king, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they've picked up the royal hints that Jesus is laying. This is a messianic claim again, a claim to be the Messiah, the King, and they're going to push it for all it's worth.
And how much do you think they've grasped of Jesus's the nature of Jesus's reign?
Oh, possibly not very much at all. I mean, rather like Peter last week, they may be onto something correct about Jesus the Messiah, but may be very wrong about what kind of Messiah is, what kind of reign it is. I think it's very hard for us not to assume that they would have thought that there's going to be incredible nationalistic overcoming of the Romans. We're going to get rid of the hated Romans. Just Pilate and all his minions are going to disappear. And finally, we're going to have an independent Jewish nation where we're in charge, and of course, theoretically, God is in charge over us. I'm sure that's what they're going for.
And how big a crowd is this? Is this, just the 12 disciples, or is it half of Jerusalem that's come out? What's going on?
Question. Yeah, I think we do need a bit of perspective on that. I think we're talking here about a group of Galilean travelers who've been traveling for a week, as I said. We're talking 400 or 500 possibly, been keeping themselves together as a kind of caravanserai, if you like, traveling together. We've got women and teenagers there as well, people over the age of 12. You know, it's not just the 12 disciples, it's a vast crowd. The other thing that to say is it doesn't yet include anyone from Jerusalem. No one in Jerusalem has been looking out to see when Jesus is going to arrive at 3:30 in the afternoon. They don't know he's coming. They're not sending out a welcome party. This crowd that's around Jesus is almost certainly people who've traveled with him and are coming up from Galilee.
And, you know, are there going to be, if it's a time of pilgrimage, are there going to be sort of people from other parts of the country who have gathered there, sort of watching in? What are they going to be thinking as they see this celebration? Would they have heard of Jesus? Would they think, who is this? What's going on?
Well, we read in Matthew's Gospel that the people in Jerusalem are asking, who on earth is this? And the report goes around, oh, Jesus of Nazareth, the prophet from Galilee, has come to town. We read that in Matthew chapter 21. So who knows what the people gathered in Jerusalem already on that day were thinking and what they'd previously heard of Jesus. We can't fully answer that. Yes, there would be people who didn't normally live in Jerusalem who had already turned up and were there. Some Galileans might have arrived a few days before and already have their campsite set up on the Mount of Olives. So it's almost impossible to determine ins and outs of the crowd, but it's a very exciting time.
Okay, well, Peter, why don't you read the next couple of verses, Luke chapter 19, verses 39 and 40, because not everyone is celebrating, are they?
Well, that's right. In Luke 19:39, we read of some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," Jesus replied, "if they keep quiet, stones will cry out."
Why are the Pharisees responding like that?
Well, we've seen Pharisees who live all around the country and up in Galilee. We've seen them before up in Galilee, taunting Jesus, questioning him as to why he makes the claims he does. Remember that Pharisees are basically good people. They really do desire God's people, ancient Israel, to be a holy people and to purify themselves and get themselves ready for that day when God really will come and vindicate his people. And Jesus, in many ways, agreed with them. He just had a disagreement as to how God was going to come and at what time. And Jesus now claiming to be God coming amongst his people. So they're good people. They're really affected by this extravagant claim, which they see, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. They finding that is too much. This royal claim and this hint that he's coming with the full authority of Yahweh, the name of the Lord. Remember, the name was the very presence, the very character, the very faithfulness of God. And so there's quite a claim being made by the crowd. And Jesus, on this occasion, does not say, no, keep quiet. He says, this is the time to tell everybody.
Do you think it's fair to say that the claims that Jesus is making and that the crowd are making about Jesus are so big that actually it's not possible to sort of be neutral and just go, right, okay, I'll let them get on with it. As in, if you understand the claims and you disagree with them, then it's going to provoke a negative reaction like the Pharisees have given.
I think that's right. I think the way you see the Pharisees making this very stern, rebuking response to Jesus shows that they have picked up the enormity of what is being claimed and which Jesus is accepting. And I think then you realize that the claims of Jesus are very much either accepted or rejected at your peril.
Talk to us about Jesus's response. He says, if they keep quiet, if his disciples keep quiet, then the stones will cry out. I mean, what does he mean by that?
Well, it's absolutely outrageous. I mean, it's Jesus at his most blunt, I think. He's saying, think about it. These very stones on the Mount of Olives, which have been here for millennia, since creation. They know better than you Pharisees do what is precisely happening at this moment. These stones are going to cry out that the Lord of creation has passed this way. It's a devastating claim, and Jesus is hinting, it's another of the hints in this passage of the divinity of Jesus coming through seemingly in a very sort of throwaway line, but when you press behind what Jesus is saying, you think, my goodness, Jesus, how do you get away with this kind of stuff? Who do you really think you are? And I think that's what he's claiming.
So it may be possible to sort of just say, he's using Lord as a in a human way. It's possible for someone to sort of throw up that objection, but here there's no real sort of, the plain meaning is he's claiming to be more than.
I think that's right. It's not quite a plain meaning. It's still an enigmatic phrase. You have to tease it out. He doesn't say, I am the second person of the Holy Trinity. He never does that. But he does it by a more provocative way, which forces you to do your thinking and come up, my goodness, I think that's what he was truly implying. We have to make the inference. There's a lot of Jesus teaching us like that. But I do think we need to see that in the Synoptic Gospels, that what looks very innocuous at one level, Jesus not making the full-on I am kind of sayings which we get in John's Gospel. Actually, in the Synoptic Gospels, he's saying equally outrageous things, but from a slightly more nuanced perspective.
Okay, well, let's move on to watch our fourth video for tonight, because that picks up on the Pharisees' attitude to Jesus of rejecting him.
We're coming now to a small church which commemorates a strange and bizarre event only described in Luke's Gospel, when Jesus, despite being at the centre of the crowd's excited celebrations, suddenly himself bursts into tears. The church is called Dominus Flavit, that's Latin for the Lord wept, and it was built in the 1950s, and you'll notice how its roof is in the shape of a teardrop. When we go inside, we'll discover that the arched window has at its centre the silhouetted outline of a chalice or cup, a reminder of Jesus' blood shed for us. And the chalice, as we look through the window towards Jerusalem, turns out to be directly lined up with Golgotha or Calvary, the place of Jesus' crucifixion. It's a powerful place to hear the words which Jesus spoke as he too looked out over Jerusalem, the city which would soon reject him. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." Whenever I come to Jerusalem, I try to come for a quiet visit here to the Mount of Olives, to look over Jerusalem, as it were, with the eyes of Jesus. Jesus evidently loved Jerusalem and her people. Back in Luke 13, he'd said, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." Those are words of deep love, like the tender love of a mother, but also of deep concern. Jerusalem seemingly has a strange reputation for rejecting God's messengers. So Jesus senses that Jerusalem will ultimately not receive him, but will reject him, the ultimate messenger sent to her by God. And the results will be catastrophic. We learn from Luke 13 that Jerusalem's house, that is her temple, will be abandoned by God and left desolate, void of his presence. And from Jesus' words in Luke 19, that Jerusalem's enemies, as it turned out, the Roman armies, will set a siege round the city and eventually destroy it. Because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Jesus' arrival into Jerusalem was the most important moment in its long history. The moment when God himself, in the person of his Son, came to the city, expecting to be welcomed. The city of God, opening wide her gates to usher in the Son of God, the Lord of glory. But she didn't. Instead, even though dressed up like a bride on her wedding day, She turned her face away at the approach of the bridegroom. Jerusalem's rejection of Jesus is one of the most tragic stories in the Bible, and it leaves us with some important questions to ponder. For ourselves, there's the question, if human beings seem to be on the run, running away from God, even though he's reaching out to us his arms of love, is that true of us as individuals? Which way are we facing? Have we turned to face God, to welcome him and to receive his love? Or are we still on the run? And for Jerusalem, there's the question, if Jesus chided the city of peace, Jerusalem, with not knowing the things that belong to her peace, would he be saying exactly the same today?
Well, let's get that text up on the screen because it's quite striking what Jesus says. He says that the people don't recognize him, and therefore there's going to be judgment. That the armies will come and encircle them, and look at to that last sentence, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. So Peter, as he's riding into Jerusalem, Jesus knows that he's going to be rejected.
That's right. It's one of the themes that we've had throughout Luke's Gospel. He spoke in Nazareth back at the beginning about a prophet being rejected and being not without honor except in his own country. He's going up to Jerusalem with a full expectation of being rejected. Back in Luke 13, he says, far be it from a prophet to die anywhere except outside in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the place which regularly slays and kills the prophets and those sent to her. So it's a very strange part of Jerusalem's history, I'm afraid, that Jesus is pointing up here and seeing he's going to be fulfilling, namely it's going to be the place which once again is going to stone or reject or kill a messenger sent from God. And he's walking straight into the storm, knowing what's going to happen.
I mean, it is utterly tragic, isn't it? I only just noticed as I was reading that Jesus is explicit enough in verse 44 to say they didn't recognize the time of God's coming to them. It is the very thing they've been hoping for, and they reject it.
This is the people of God living in the city of God, around the temple, which is designed for the worship of God. And this is their moment. This is the moment that they have been created for, that creation has been created for, and they're going to turn a blind eye to it. They're going to reject, and it's a very solemn. I think Luke describes this with tears in his eyes. He's actually a Gentile. He's not a Jewish person, so I think he's very gentle and soft in some ways in what he's portraying. There's no stridency, but I think Luke is very aware of the tragedy. And of course, Jesus himself in this passage is weeping and crying. You can imagine if you went to a wedding and the bridegroom suddenly burst into tears halfway through the service, and it wasn't tears of happiness, it was tears of absolute dereliction and sadness. And that's what happens to Jesus on his coronation day here. Suddenly he bursts into tears uncontrollably almost. And he's not weeping for himself, he's weeping for the beloved bride, which is Jerusalem.
So it's a bittersweet moment for him because he's looking forward to a real event that happened, isn't he, in AD 70? Is that right?
The extraordinary thing is that Jesus comes down over the Mount of Olives and sees that view that we saw a moment ago in the video, looking across the valley to where the temple would have been. He sees it with prophetic eyes, as it will be in almost exactly 40 years' time. This event that we're looking at tonight probably takes place in the last days of March AD 30. In August AD 70, 40 years and about 4 months later, that same view is going to be what we saw in the video: flames and fire, the temple being burnt, and then the city being burnt. Jesus can see what's going to happen one generation on, and it's a tragic, sweet moment.
You ended that video by asking the viewer and to see how Jesus challenges us there. That the question is, are we moving towards him or away from him? How does us 2,000 years later, being able to look back on what the Romans did to Jerusalem? How does that add urgency to that challenge?
Well, I think it does. We see here the prophecy of the solemn consequences of what would happen to a people or to a city which rejected the one who came with arms of love towards it. And we're being warned here very seriously in the Bible and in this passage that you can't reject that love offer and not meet consequences. So there's a very serious side to this. I wouldn't want us to finish on that. I'd love us to notice that there is tender compassion of Jesus in this story as well.
So Jesus is not, it's not just something back then. Jesus now is warning us with tears about the consequences of not turning to him. What would you say to someone who thinks, do you know, I've been running away from Jesus my whole life. I can't turn to him now. Surely he's not interested in me.
Well, there's a great verse in the Gospels about Jesus not turning away anyone that comes to him, and also not breaking a bruised reed. And so everything we know of Jesus in the Gospels is he's the one who welcomes the repentant, welcomes the sinner, welcomes the person who turns round. What was that story of the prodigal son all about back in Luke 15? It was someone turning around. They've been in the pigsty. They've made a wreck of their lives. They decide that they're just going to turn round. And who comes out to meet them? The prodigal father runs out to meet them. And that's it. Jesus uses that to teach about his ministry, which is going out to welcome the returning people who are lost. And so anyone who's listening tonight who thinks they can't turn around and no one will accept them, the whole message of the gospel is that the God of Jesus Christ is a welcoming Father, and Jesus has gone to the uttermost to welcome us back. So let's hear that word of love, even as we hear in the back of our mind solemn judgment which comes if people do reject that overture of love which is coming to them.
Peter, thank you very much for joining us. It's been wonderful for us to see the Mount of Olives and to follow Jesus on his entry into Jerusalem. If you would like to find out more, you can get hold of Peter's book from his website, walkwaybooks.com. If you go there, you'll be able to find the book and find some other resources that he's got, and you'll be able to find out more about the land that Jesus was in. If you want to read more of Luke's Gospel and to get to know more of what Jesus is like, Peter just alluded to the story of the prodigal son. To find out about Jesus's character, it'll be a wonderful thing for you to read Luke's Gospel for yourself. You can search for it online and find a version there. Many people have Bibles. If you want a copy of Luke's Gospel, email conversations@email.com and we will send one out to you. And you'll be able to read that through and read this eyewitness account of Jesus' life and find out more about Jesus. Thank you very much for joining us. That's it for this week. We look forward to seeing you next week, where we'll be in Jerusalem. But for now, good night.